shining a light on the issue of domestic violence.
The United Nations study out this week finds domestic violence is one of the most common killers of women around the world.
Fears are growing at domestic violence shelters. Domestic violence experts in our top story.
Well, a domestic violence situation quickly turned into an assault.
The federal government calls it a pervasive problem that frequently goes undetected.
We're talking about the courage that it takes to come forward as a victim.
All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. My name is Ryan Stillwater. I'm the Development Director with Saving Grace, based in Bend. We serve the Tri-County area here in Central Oregon. If you're unfamiliar with us, we are really the only organization providing services and programs for survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and intimate partner stalking. When headlines started to roll about stressful events, seasons, there's a spike in domestic violence. And that is clearly alarming to us at Saving Grace and to the community, especially when the stay-at-home order took place and businesses started closing. You know, we had McMenamins that right away laid off 3,000 employees. The number nationwide is now at 22 million. One thing that came to mind specifically is we did a survey of survivors back last fall, and we asked the question, when did the abuse escalate? And the most common answer was at the loss of a job. So today I have invited a couple friends, Tyler Vlodica, he is a local therapist and a good friend, and Christopher Yucho, he is one of our longtime facilitators and managers, right, Christopher, at Mary's Place. Mary's Place is the Safe Exchange and Visitation Center in Bend. I'm excited to have both these guys here. What we're going to cover in this conversation specifically is what are the different types of abuse, what causes a man or woman to become abusive, how can we process our stress and anxiety during this pandemic in a healthy way. There's a couple of resources that I gleaned from some prep. One is Why Does He Do That? Pretty popular. And then this one I threw out the book jacket because I'm not a fan of book jackets, but it's called No Visible Bruises. This came out last year. So I'll be referencing those quite a bit. Yeah. Let's jump right in. What are the various forms of abuse that show themselves in a romantic, intimate relationship?
You want me to kick this one off? Yeah, for me, I mean, obviously, abuse looks like a whole lot of different things, and it's not typically something that's easy to define.
So there's, physical and sexual abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's spiritual abuse, economic, using coercion and threats.
There's a fine line between dysfunction and actual abuse.
Isolation, which right now, is like, it's pretty, we're all isolating potentially. And so that's a lot easier for an abuser to even further that isolation and use justifications as the pandemic. And also, using, especially like, and during a pandemic, using economic abuse, and coercion and threats for physical violence or deportation or using their male privilege, which is probably the most driving thing about, the tactics, just that core belief. And I think this is where, a lot of abuse comes from, is that core belief of, I believe I can dominate you. That's my right to dominate you, to control you. And I'll use physical force, how much ever I need, and full out violence or homicide, if necessary.
We have to make sure that we also define how we care for ourselves, because if we're not caring for ourselves, we quickly spiral into the place where abuse is sort of a result of lack of care, lack of understanding.
And I'm going to share my screen here for a second because this, I think, kind of highlights or summarizes. So this is the results from that survey I mentioned. So the question being, aside from physical abuse, what other aspects were present in your relationship? So top one being verbal intimidation, isolation from friends and family, abuse of trust, coercion. So those are the top five. And even though we said aside from physical, we still put it in there, and that was selected. So controlled my money is a big one. Threats to hurt me. Tyler, goes to your point of what do you do when you don't feel safe? That's a big red flag. So if you're being threatened with violence or deportation or being locked out of bank accounts, of course you will probably you'll respond a self-preserving way. You'll respond in a way that'll have the less detriment to your own children. So we've been sharing a little bit of this survey in here and there, but I'll be sure to put this in the final recording for everyone, so you can take a closer look at it. Again, one reason I wanted to do this is I'm hoping that, again, since men are predominantly the abusive person in the relationship, for men who also have shown statistically that losing a job and this kind of stress caused by the pandemic is going to give them so much that they don't know how to deal with. How can someone watching this who's like, I am feeling this, I am feeling stress, I am feeling like my family's on eggshells, I do feel like I'm going to explode and I'm scared, and this has never been me, maybe I've never had this much going on. What can you guys lend to them as far as help that they can do, in the privacy of their own home with a meditation app, or Tyler, I know that you're doing remote counseling now, just like we're doing here. What things can they do? What maybe preconceived ideas about therapy can you address that maybe they'll think like, man, maybe that doesn't sound like what I thought therapy would be like? I think that's long enough of a tee up. Go for it.
Thanks for teeing that up. I'll start real quick since you dropped my my telehealth sessions in there. Yeah, we're doing therapy all on the computer now too, just like this. And yeah, I think that the importance of therapy is not so much the interventions. It's not so much the modalities that we use in therapy, but it would be extremely important to create different resources within our life. If that's therapy, great. If that's talking to mom, that's great. If that's having a puppy to snuggle, that's great. Those are different resources that are not just for self-soothing, but there's a whole level of our nervous system that's just focused on social engagement. And so if we're not doing conversations like this, even through a computer, I don't think mirror neurons work quite the same way over a computer screen, but face-to-face they do, and they actually heal.
Yeah, I've been in contact with a lot of our, dads in our program, and just checking in with them about, how they're doing and what are they doing for self-care. And we've been, hearing a lot of, physical stuff, doing physical things, so that they can still engage in and social distance and keep their families safe during the pandemic, and reduce their risk of transmission or, infection. And hearing a lot of folks going out and even fishing and chopping wood, and all the way to journaling and writing their kids letters that they might give them. They might not be able to give them right now, but at a later date, if they're not seeing their children. We're hearing a lot of folks, turning to baking and, cooking food and taking good care of themselves that way, all the way to, taking a bubble bath, for crying out loud. So
I think one thing that's always been helpful for me, I don't know where I first heard it, is that our feelings are real, but they're not always the truth. And I wonder, I don't think, something like humility is on like the psychologist's, like, it's not like a brain level conversation, but I am curious how beneficial it would be for someone who maybe doesn't typically open up to their partner. It is stereotype of men that we don't talk about our emotions a lot. We have a hard time with that, but just to communicate, I feel emasculated by losing my job. I feel like you're looking at me and you're disappointed. And those feelings could be incredibly real. And now this individual is coming to all these different conclusions and having this whole conversation in his head about his partner and what she's thinking and feeling towards him. And if he would just say that, and then allow her to maybe speak some truth, just to be humble, say what you're feeling, and then hear their response, either to validate maybe that is right on. But I'm guessing more often than not, the feelings that some men are experiencing about who they are, how they think their partner views them, are not the truth. Any thoughts there?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, um, there's a lot of different ways that folks can communicate, and especially men can communicate to their partners how they're feeling in a very, whatever, a super safe way for them, whether that be writing it down on a piece of paper and leaving it on the counter and just say, hey, this is the way I'm feeling right now. These are the things I'm struggling with. Can you help me? Or not even, can you help me, just letting them know what they're struggling with. I've talked to guys that really would love to be able to text their partner, just, whatever they're feeling about, what are their frustrations.
Yeah, that's great, Christopher. I'll just add with something real quick, because I love what you said about different ways to communicate. And that's so important, because it's going to look different for everyone. How I communicate with my spouse is going to be different than how you guys probably would too. But there's something not magical, it feels magical, about communicating with our hands. And oftentimes in therapy, I'll talk about it with men. In terms of, face-to-face communication is really difficult, because there's different types of connection when I can see your eyes, especially if it's an intimate partner. And the other option, so face-to-face communication is one way, but the other option that you talked about, I call it shoulder to shoulder. It's when you're doing something active, going for a walk, or, when the mountain's open, skiing, or sitting on the lift, right? You're shoulder to shoulder. Even watching a movie, sometimes you're sitting shoulder to shoulder. And so it's opportunities like that not only create connection, but they can also be opportunities of communication that doesn't feel threatening at all. Because part of what you mentioned too, Christopher, early on, is this male privilege is we're not expected to solve problems with our words. According to society, right? It'd be great if we were, but that's just not the case. And so we use that to our advantage. Oftentimes we take the privilege and we say, okay, if I don't have to solve this with my words, I don't have to solve it at all. And so oftentimes the shoulder to shoulder communication can alleviate some of that pressure.
Nice. Good stuff, you guys. I'm wondering how many men out there justify their dysfunction or borderline abuse or straight up abuse because it's not physical. So it's not like I'm hitting you, I'm providing, I'm doing these things. But I'm curious, question for both of you, how often do children mention, daddy yelling versus daddy hitting? Just so for a man watching this who's like, oh shoot, I've said that, I've totally shouted that at my family. It's not like I'm hitting you, thinking that the other forms are okay. And then how we justify it also in the, you just make me so, like how we use our words to communicate. You just make me so mad. You just make me, as if they're like the victim at the, you know what I mean? Like they're being victimized. And so they're lashing out as caused by the other person. Yeah. You guys want to chime in on that? Any part of that?
Yeah, I'll kick us off. I was thinking about your comment earlier about feelings too, when you were talking about the "you just make me," the responsibility that we carry with our feelings, right? And they may not always be true, but they're always real. And so if our feelings are real, then it's really a logistical impossibility to say someone else is making me feel them. So they're yours, and you have to take responsibility for those as a man. And I'm speaking to myself just as much as anybody, but yeah, I think that's a crucial delineation in talking about where we are comfortable expressing emotions, and how easy it is to say, well, I'm feeling this because you did this. And yeah, there are certain instances when somebody does something and I get an emotion, and yet I'm still responsible for how I respond to that action and what I do with my emotions, because they are real. So the onus is always on ourself to be able to control those and to be able to experience them. And I think that, again, that goes back to the language we use and the comfortability we have in even expressing that we have these feelings, whether they're negative or not. So yeah.
And I think one of the things that we need to recognize as well is emotional abuse. You have there's a lot more complexity to it, and one of the things that also makes it a lot more dangerous is because it's a lot harder to prove. Most of the tactics within, like abusing somebody emotionally, using coercion, using threats, most of those things aren't against the law unto themselves. What we see at Mary's Place is children who have very vivid memories of both verbal and physical abuse that they have witnessed or heard or been a part of as well. So many times, just because a father is abusive to the mom, that does not mean that there's a higher probability that they'll also be abusive towards the kids, statistically speaking. So children do disclose, the parent who has done harm, yelling, or also we see them even acting out that physical, those scenarios, those physical abuse scenarios within our center, within the supervised visits.
Gotcha. Thank you, man. And kudos to 8 years of doing that job, Christopher. I mean, really, it's a big deal.
It's the most rewarding work I've ever done.
Another quote from No Visible Bruises. She says, "We look for the rageaholic, but only about 25% of batterers fit that definition. Instead, it's an inflexible personality, rigid black or white thinker." So I feel like that kind of summarizes some of what we've been discussing. And could that be a way that someone who is super stressed and feeling the dysfunction in their home, possibly for the first time, with this pandemic, could possibly just being flexible, like choosing to be flexible, choosing to be nimble, choosing to maybe change the role in the house, like you've never had to cook or clean that bathroom and now you do, and that's okay. Just be flexible, Is that something that would be just a very simple way of showing that, like, I can do this?
I would say, yeah, I love the idea of flexibility. I mean, what you're describing is flexibility, not just psychologically, but also physiologically, and doing chores and being around the house and having different types of roles. But in counseling session, I often refer to that as a resiliency. Things are changing, and how do I respond to these external pieces in a way that is healthy? Yeah, I like the idea of being able to be flexible.
I agree. Flexibility, and it's a little bit of a letting go, I suppose, letting go of some of the things that you're like really holding on to, and being, not flexible about. But the caveat of that, that is great. However, unless you're doing this to kind of save it for later, like, okay, I'm being super flexible now, and I'm going to put this in my memory bank, and then I'm going to pull out this time and weaponize it against somebody else. So that's when it doesn't become okay, and I guess that's one of the things that I guess I could see happening with some folks who are just like, oh yeah, I'll just be flexible now, but then when later on they'll use that against the other party.
Wow, that's a great point. That's such a great point. It's like the means. Is doing the laundry the means to an end, or is it just the end? I just did laundry, and that's it. I had no agenda with the laundry. I think that's a killer point. That's a good point. I would love to do this again, as we're about an hour in, and there's clearly so much more we could talk about. Hopefully, for those of you watching, man or woman, hope you found something in here that you can run with, even to a small degree. Like, Tyler and Christopher listed, there's a number of ways that you can find some care, some help, some guidance, just some emotional stability with all the newness of this pandemic season. So, and of course, for those of you who don't know, we do have a 24-hour helpline at Saving Grace. If you are feeling unsafe with a partner at home, please call 541-389-7021. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I got a lot to think about. I gleaned a ton. I truly appreciate both your perspectives, where you're coming from, both on the counseling side, Tyler, and then working with families, Christopher. Yeah, thank you both very much.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
care.
we'll do this again.
Be healthy.
I can hear the winter slowly